All right, so if you have a Bible with you, open up to Hosea chapter 2. And if you don't have a Bible, that's okay. On the carts in the tunnels where you came in, there are some Bibles. And so you can grab one of those if you want. And if you don't own a Bible, just keep it. That's for you. But either way, maybe you got the app on your phone or on your tablet, something. Go ahead and open up to Hosea chapter 2. That's where we're going to be this morning. We're in the third week of this series called Pursued. And this series is just walking us through the life of this guy named Hosea. Now, Hosea was a prophet. In other words, he's somebody that God gives these messages to, and he says, Hosea, I need you to give this message to these people, or I need you to tell them that I said this, or whatever. But the thing that made Hosea's story unique was God said, Hosea, you're not going to give them this message with words. You're going to give them this message through your life. And Hosea said, well, what's that all about? So God said, all right, here's what's going to happen. There's this prostitute named Gomer. You're going to marry her. You're going to fall in love with her. But she's going to constantly betray you. She's going to constantly break your marriage. She's going to constantly go outside of your marriage to chase after other lovers, to pursue satisfaction in other places. Hosea, this is going to be painful. It's going to be heartbreaking. It's going to be miserable. And Hosea's like, man, I think I got a bad connection. What? Because most of us, if God told us to do that, wouldn't you think that's completely backwards from what God would tell us to do? We would think, if anything, God would say, hey, if you want to live a happy life, don't marry the prostitute. But God said, Hosea, this is what you're going to do. And the reason was this. There's a moral to this story. The reason is because God didn't just want Hosea to deliver a message with words. This message was so important to God that he wanted Hosea to experience a little bit of heartbreak. He wanted Hosea to experience that pain and that longing for someone to love you when you love them and they just don't return it and they constantly betray you. Because what happened was God's people, the Israelites, were constantly running away from him. They were constantly turning their backs on him. They were constantly betraying him and breaking God's heart. And so God says, Hosea, I want the people to understand, man, when they do this, like, it hurts. And so you're not just going to give them this message with words. There's going to be feeling in it for you. Hosea, you're going to experience what I experience, and then you're going to be able to relate that to the people. Now, the thing is, if you or I got that call, we'd be like, man, I don't want to live that life. I don't want to live that life. I don't want to do that. It sounds miserable. But that's what God called Hosea to. So last week we talked about sin. We talked about the thing that creates a separation between us and God, that sin drives a wedge between us and God, and it creates this divide, right? And behind me on the stage is this board. It's a powerful reminder of some of those sins and some of the things that you and I struggle with. I mean, things like hate and greed or stealing or envy or jealousy. And if we're honest, that list could go on and on and on. It could fill boards just like that the whole way across the back of the stage. Because the list of sins that we struggle with is so just immense. And we talked about like this tension between our desire and God's desire for us. And there was this tension in the air and we didn't really resolve it. And if you were here last week, we just kind of let it hang. And hopefully this past week has been a chance for you to wrestle with that a little bit and start to ask some tough questions about the sin in your life and some of the things maybe that you need to let go of, or some of the things that you run to. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to follow that conversation about sin, and we're going to take the next logical step, and we're going to talk about shame. And here's the big idea today, okay? Sin separates us from God, but shame is what keeps us running, what pushes us further, widens the gap. Sin creates a separation, but shame is what divides. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to talk about running, all right? So I want to give you some experience from my own life so that you know I understand a little bit about this. Just some embarrassing moments from my life. All right. So the first moment I really felt shame that I can remember, I was like 5 or 6 years old, and my little brother Mike, who's here this morning, he's 3 years younger than me, and he knew how to push my buttons. I mean, he could get under my skin so easy. I mean, if you grew up with a little brother or sister, you know. Right? And I'm sure I pushed his buttons just as much as he pushed mine, but man, he could get under my skin. And so when he would do that, I wasn't going to take it. Like, he's half my size. No way am I taking this, right? So I would retaliate. And sooner or later, I would do enough. I'd pick on him enough or something that you know, he's 2 or 3 years old. These tears would well up in his eyes. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh no, I did it now. I knew I was in trouble. And so in the room we shared, there's this closet, and there was a door on either side and the wall in the middle. And in the closet, inside the closet, the clothes would hang inside the doors. And in the middle, there was like this open space. And I would go hide in there and hope never to be found. That was like my game plan in my 5-year-old brain. That seemed like the best course of action. Of course, my parents always knew where to look for me because I went to the same spot every single time. So it wasn't that brilliant a plan in the end, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. And now I have to tell you, or else I'll pay for it later, I don't make my brother cry anymore because now he's twice as big as me and he bench presses like 300 pounds. And if somehow I ever managed to make him cry, he would tear my arms off and use them as weapons against me. So I'm just gonna put it out there so that I don't hear about it later. I don't make him cry anymore. But anyway, that's like the first time I felt this need to run. I was like, oh my gosh, I've done it now. I got to go and hide. And then if you flash forward a few years, I was speaking at this youth thing, and it was in a room kind of like this, except there was this big balcony across the back. And it was kind of distant. And so before the event starts, we're trying to get people hyped up. We're trying to get people excited. And we had the 3-man slingshot. You guys know what a 3-man slingshot is? Couple people hold the sides, and one person grabs the middle and winds back, and you shoot stuff. And it's a lot of fun, all right? So we're shooting T-shirts and all these things that could never hurt anybody. And from somewhere backstage, as we're doing this, somebody brings out this box of Ho-Hos. You know what those are? Little chocolate snack cakes. There's 2 in a pack and the little cardboard square in the bottom and all that stuff. So I'm like, I'm gonna shoot one of these to the upper deck. So I load the slingshot up and I'm pulling this thing back, and I'm pulling as hard as I can pull. The guys are straining to hold up their sides of this slingshot, and I'm pulling as hard as I can, and I get this thing all wound up and I let it rip. And right when I let it go, the cords on the side like twisted. And instead of shooting gracefully into the upper deck, it shot like a chocolate rocket right at this middle school kid in the front row. And his head was turned to the side. He was talking to his buddy, and he never had a prayer. That thing shot at him 100 miles an hour, and I'm watching it like it's in slow motion. And it hit him in the head in this explosion of chocolate and cream. And his head did this thing where it like snapped to the back a little bit, and he turned and looked at me, and then he fell over. And I'm like, I just murdered this kid in front of a room full of people with a ho-ho. And I wanted to be anywhere else. I did not want to stand on that stage. I was like, I need to go backstage. I need to find a dark corner. And I need to hide because they're probably coming to arrest me right now. And I felt this need to run. And then, of course, some of you have heard this story before, but I'll tell it again anyway because I know some of you haven't heard this. This is probably my finest moment in my entire life, leading worship at this thing. And so we're just getting ready to kick off the first session. And as worship leaders often do, and John does this really well, you try to say something spiritual to get people like in the zone, you know? And so our theme for this thing is being born again. And no Bible verses were coming to mind, so I did the dumbest thing possible, okay? Look in the front row, and there's this lady who's pregnant. Very obviously pregnant, like she could give birth any minute, all right? And so I made the dumbest decision possible at that moment. I asked her over the microphone when her baby was due. And she looked at me and she said, "I'm not pregnant." And those words haunt me to this day, just so you know. But that's not even the worst part, all right? Because when she said that to me, her voice was shockingly deep and surprisingly masculine. And so it turns out this was actually a man. And as you're probably reasoning for yourself right now, he was also not pregnant. Like, what could I have said to possibly be worse than that? You know what I mean? I wanted to run. That's all I can say. I just wanted to be anywhere, but right there in that moment, I just wanted out. I just wanted out. Now, if we're being honest, we've all had that moment, right? Hopefully you haven't had that moment, but we've all had that moment where we do something so stupid and we just want to run. We just want out of there. We want to be anywhere else but where we are. If you have Hosea chapter 2 open, let's just dive right into this, and we're going to talk about this a little bit. So it starts this way. We're going to start in chapter 2, verse 4. It says this: "I will not show my love to her children because they are the children of adultery." Well, we light off on an encouraging note with this one today. God says these children, now Now you got to understand this. When he talks about her, when he refers to her, there's double meaning in this because God is speaking about the people. He's talking about the Israelites, his chosen people that Hosea is giving this message to. But he's saying this to a guy in Hosea who has this wife that he can relate all of this to, this woman that he loves that's betrayed him. And this verse tells us that she's had children that were conceived outside of their marriage. These other lovers that she's chasing after, she's conceived children with them. And now Hosea has to love them. He has to care for them. He has to take care of them. So there's double meaning in this. It's not just God talking about people. This is personal for him. And so when God says things like, Hosea, you're going to name your children things like this. Like your wife's about to have a son, so you're going to name him Jezreel. Well, Jezreel was it was a situation that the Israelites just really messed some things up and God's going to punish them for. And God says, you're going to name your son after that. And then later on, Gomer becomes pregnant with a daughter. And God says, this daughter you're about to have, you're going to name her Lo Ruhamah, which means not loved. Like, can you imagine if you have a daughter, can you imagine if God had called you up and said, hey, I know you're thinking about naming her like Sarah, but no, I want you to name her not loved. And then she becomes pregnant again and she's going to have another son. And God says, you're going to name this boy Lo Ammi, which means not my people. And so now these kids that it's already hard for Hosea to care for them because of the nature of the relationship. And now even their names are a reminder of the pain and the hurt in Hosea's life because it's a reflection of what God is trying to communicate through him to the people. And it's a story that he's living out. So God says, I'm not going to show love to them because they're children of adultery. And then he goes on and he says this. He says, their mother's been unfaithful and has conceived them in disgrace. She said, I'll go after my lovers who give me my food and my water, my wool and my linen, my olive oil and my drink. You see, Gomer was constantly chasing after these other lovers. She was constantly looking for comfort and company in other men's arms instead of her husband because she wasn't finding the satisfaction. She was looking for it in the wrong places. She was looking for it in the wrong places. And in the same way, the Israelites, these people that were God's chosen people, they're constantly looking for their satisfaction in all the wrong places. Meanwhile, God is stepping back and he's saying, what are you looking for out there? I'm right here. I'm right here. But they were doing it anyway. And so this reminds me of a story in Luke chapter 15. Jesus told this story, and maybe you've heard it before, but it goes like this. Once there was a man who had 2 sons, and life was good. Life was good. They were wealthy. Sons had everything they could ever want or need. But that wasn't good enough. The younger son had some attitude problems, and he was tired of living under his father's rules and under his father's roof and working on his father's land. And so one day he goes to his dad and he says, hey, Dad, I know you're not dead yet, but you're close enough for me. I want my part of the inheritance. I want what's mine. Give me what's coming to me. So his father took his estate, he divided it between his 2 sons, and the younger son took what was his, and it wasn't long before he packed his bags, and he headed off to this distant land. And there, because he was undisciplined, it wasn't long before he wasted everything he had. Now, I don't know about you, but I can relate to that a little bit. I've done that. I've done that because sometimes we make decisions intentionally. We know where they're going to lead us. We know where they're going to lead us. We know if I choose this, not only is it outside of God's plan, but it's unhealthy and it's unwise. And we know where some of those decisions are going to take us. We know it's going to create this situation where we're not only separated from God, but we're far from him. And maybe it's because you're hurt. Maybe it's because you're mad. Maybe it could be any number of things. But whatever's happened, someday you wake up and you're far from God and you knew you were going to be there, but you didn't care. You packed your bags and off you went. Well, the story continues. After he'd gone through all his money, there was a bad famine all through that country, and he began to hurt. So he signs on with this citizen, this local farmer. And the farmer puts him to work feeding the pigs. And it says that he was so hungry that he would have been completely happy eating the corn cobs that were in the pig slop, but nobody would give him any. In the story of Hosea, this is where God's people find themselves. And God's saying, you're paying the price for the choices that you made. These are the consequences of the decisions that you made. Yeah, you're out there and you're hurt and you're alone and it stinks, but you made your bed, now you got to lie in it. You did this intentionally. So God says, Hosea, here's what I'm going to do. He says, I will block her path with thorn bushes. I will wall her in so she cannot find her way. She will chase after her lovers, but not catch them. She will look for them, but not find them. I love the way another version of the Bible says that. It says, she'll go on the hunt for her lovers, but will not bring down a single one. Do we have any hunters in the room? Any guys, anybody, ladies, anybody like to hunt? If you hunt, I'm going to tell you about a day that you've had. Maybe a few weeks before deer season opens, you start scouting the woods, right? You're looking at the trees, you're looking at the ground, you're looking around, you're looking for deer trails, you're looking for all the places, the beds, you're trying to figure out where the deer are, and you scout out your spot. So then maybe the day before deer season opens, you go out in the woods and you set yourself up in the spot that you've scouted out, you get everything set, maybe you put your deer stand up or you set your chair up, whatever you're gonna do, and you get everything ready. And then the day deer season opens, you're out in the woods like a couple hours before sunrise because you don't want to be seen by the deer. And you creep into the woods as quiet as you possibly can because you don't want to be heard by the deer. And you're so careful, and you get in your spot and you're all set. And then the sun starts to rise, and there you are, and you're ready, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting. And the deer never comes. You've had that day. If you hunt, you've had that day. Well, that's what God says Gomer's going to experience. She's going to go out and she's going to go after these things, but they're not going to come. She's going to go on the hunt for them, but she won't find them. Now, just reading through these verses, that can seem really insignificant, but it's not. There's something really important in there for us, and it's this. To Gomer, she's just searching for satisfaction. And maybe in her mind, God's not letting her have it. And we've done that, right? We've searched for something and God hasn't given it to us. And it's so easy for us to step back and say, God, what's up, man? Why can't I have this? What's the deal? God, all I'm trying to do is do something better for my family, or all I'm trying to do is do better at work, or all I'm trying to do is make more money, or all I'm trying to do is whatever it might be. And we think it's good, but meanwhile, God sees more than we see. And so sometimes he doesn't give us the things we want because he sees the big picture, and God is sitting there all the while saying, I would give this to you, but it's unhealthy, it's bad for you, it's not what's good. Maybe that promotion at work that seems like such a good thing would require more of your time, and it would take you away from your family. Maybe your family can't afford to lose some of you right now. And God's saying, you can't have this right now because it's not good and you don't see it. Yeah, I know you're mad, you don't see it, but I'm doing this to protect you. That's what he tells Hosea he's going to do for Gomer. He's protecting her by not giving her the things that she's out searching for. The same thing happens to the son in our story. He's looking for things and he doesn't find them. Instead, he wastes everything he's got. And so this is what happens to him. It says at the end of his rope, he came to his senses. He said, all those farmhands working for my father sit down to 3 meals a day, and here I am starving to death. So I'm going home. God says that's exactly what Gomer will do. He says, then she'll say, I'll go back to my husband as at first, for then I was better off than now. Not exactly the romantic reunion that you would imagine, right? Well, I guess it was better off before, so I'll go back to him. The next part of Gomer's story reveals something about many of us that maybe you don't even know about yourself. But in verse 8 it says, she has not acknowledged that I was the one, this is God speaking, she's not acknowledged that I was the one who gave her the grain and the new wine and oil, who lavished on her the silver and gold, which they used for Baal. And Baal was this false god, this idol that they worshiped. And God is saying, you're taking all these good things that I'm giving you and you're using them in the wrong way. And then you're out looking for more, but he's saying, you got to look to me because I'm the source. I'm the provider. I will give you everything you need. You just have to look to me. You just have to turn to me. And we do that sometimes. What God is saying is she forgot. She forgot. They forgot. They're out looking and they've lost sight of me. How often in the chaos of our lives, when we're in the pursuit of these things, we just lose sight of God. And one day we wake up, we didn't even know what was happening. We were just chasing after success or chasing after all these different things in life, and we lose sight of God. We wake up one day and we're far from him, and maybe you don't even know how you got there. It's like eating at Denny's. Nobody goes there on purpose. So you wake up and you're far from God. And maybe you're sitting there going, what happened? What happened? See, here's the reality. Momentum, once it builds, momentum can be impossible, seemingly, to stop or control. And I want to show you what I mean. So I have this exercise we're going to do together. Some of you maybe have seen this before. If you have, you're not allowed to participate, okay? And some of you just saw this the other day at the John Maxwell thing. If you were there, you got to just sit this one out, all right? But if you've never done this before, it's super easy. In a minute, we're going to put a couple of words on the screen, and all you have to do is follow my directions. Piece of cake, all right? Any questions? No? All right, good. Here we go. Follow my directions. Say coast. Say silk. Say coast. Say silk. Spell coast. Spell silk. Say coast. Say silk. What do you put in a toaster? Think about it. It's coming. That's so good, I'll bet I could get some of you again. Let me prove it. Ready? Here we go. Say coast. Say silk. Say coast. Say silk. Spell coast. Spell silk. Say coast. Say silk. What do cows drink? About half of you. About half of you. Some of you are like, oh, now I want to run. No, it's momentum. It's momentum. You get going, it's hard to stop. It's hard to even think about what you're doing. You're just responding. Okay? Once momentum builds, it can be really hard to control it. It can be really hard to stop it. This series that we're doing is based on a book called Pursued. It's written by a pastor from Las Vegas named Judd Wilhite. And in the book, he writes this. See if you can relate to this. He says, you know you need to deal with sin and idolatry. But what do you do when you fall back into the same destructive habits again and again? You sense the pull to gear up and try harder, to run faster after God, but you've got a hunch that within a month, your spirit will go through a slow fade into a weary limp. Sound familiar? Sometimes we know we got to deal with stuff. We know. But it seems like any amount of effort we put forward and no matter how hard we try, it's just a matter of time until we fall right back into the same routine. So what you need is a change. You need intentionality in your life. You need to do some things on purpose. If you are somebody who loses sight of God throughout the week, then maybe you need to do things like this. Maybe if you've got to drive to work, instead of listening to the radio on the way and listening to talk radio and getting angry about politics, maybe you need to turn on some worship music. Or maybe when you wake up in the morning, instead of just reading through the newspaper, maybe you should crack open your Bible and read a few verses and let God speak to you to start off your day. It's about making those intentional choices just to work God into your day-to-day, just to work him in a little bit. There's this thing called autobiography in 5 short chapters I want to read to you because it illustrates well what I'm talking about. It goes like this. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost, I'm hopeless. It isn't my fault, and it takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in this same place, but it isn't my fault, and it still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. But my eyes are open. I know where I am. It's my fault. And I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down a different street. If there's a hole and you know you're going to struggle not to fall into it, maybe you need to choose a different street. If there's a weakness, if there's a vulnerability, if there's a sin that you know you're susceptible to, then maybe you need to do something intentionally, build something into your life as a safeguard to keep you from that. It's about those intentional choices, those intentional decisions to do something different. So let's go back to the story of the younger son here. Okay, he's come to his senses. He's realized that what he's off doing on his own isn't working, so he needs to go home to his father. But here's the thing. He's broken his father's trust. He's wasted his father's possessions. He's dishonored his family. He knows odds are good his father doesn't want him back. And so this is what he concludes. He says, I'm going back to my father. I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against God. I've sinned against you. I don't deserve to be called your son. So take me on as a hired hand. And he got right up and went home to his father. And maybe that's where you are. Maybe for whatever reason, you're far from God. And you don't think he'd ever want to take you back. Maybe there's something in your life, or maybe it's even in your past, but it's something so bad that you're like, why would God ever want anything to do with me? And what right do I have to ever pray or to ever ask God for forgiveness? What right do I have to ever approach God and say, God, why would you do anything for me? I'm the least deserving person. God, why would you ever do anything for me? And maybe like this son, your thought process is, well, I'm just going to get as close as I can and see what happens. And so some of you, in your heart, in the part of you that only you know and only you see, you've never felt further from God, but you're here in the room today. Well, first of all, I want to say to you, man, I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that you're here because there is no better place for you to be to hear God speak to you. But the other thing I want you to know is something about yourself, and it's something about all of us, and it's this. In Jesus' day, traveling salesmen would go from marketplace to marketplace, and they would sell pots. And people would buy these pots, these jars, and they would keep oil or water in them, and so these were valuable pieces of merchandise. But the roads were rough, and so as these guys would travel from city to city, the cart would kind of clang back and forth. The pots would clang against each other in the back of the cart, and they would crack, and they'd break. But if you're a salesman, this is valuable merchandise, so you don't want to lose the ability to sell it, or that's just profit that's gone. So rather than try to sell a pot that's cracked that nobody's going to want, and rather than get rid of it, what you would do is you would take wax, you'd melt it down, and you would pour it into the cracks on the pot. And then you would smooth it all down so it was perfect, and then you'd paint the pot, and then as people were looking at it, they'd have no idea that it was cracked or broken or damaged. And so if you're shopping and you go to the marketplace and you see a pot you want to buy, you ask the merchant, is it without wax? That's where the English word sincere comes from. It comes from the word sine cere, which means without wax. Is this whole? Is it complete? Is it good? But you have more in common with this thing than you probably realize, because this is something that we all do. Every single one of us, we have cracks, we have imperfections, there are flaws, there are things in our life that aren't complete or whole. And something inside of us says, man, I can't let anybody see this. I can't let anybody know, because if they knew what was going on in my life, if they knew what I was up to, if they knew what was in my past, nobody here would have anything to do with me. And God already knows, so why would he want to take me back? So instead, I'm just going to smooth it over. I'm just going to paint it up. I'm going to put on a good face. I'm going to show up. I'm going to play the game. I'm going to do the routine, and I'm just going to hope nobody notices. And so you work day in and day out. You do everything. You exhaust yourself just trying to put on a good face and pretend that you've got everything together. But the reality is this, and I promise you it's true every single time. No matter how hard you work, trying to hold things together and just trying to keep your place and trying to make sure nobody knows what's going on, no matter how much energy you put into it, sooner or later, you fall. And then you're left trying to pick up the pieces on your own. Because why would God want you back? And why would anybody else want this? Something inside of you says, if people just saw what I really looked like, if they saw the real me, they wouldn't accept me. They'd judge me, or they'd hate me, or they'd reject me. I want you to know something. You can't put the pieces back together on your own. The more you try, the better it's going to look to run. But I want you to know something else. You are never too broken. You are never too damaged. You are never too bruised or wounded or hurt or ugly or dirty to be used by God. People might look at this and they might see pieces. They might see a shattered reality. They might see pieces of a life that you would give anything to put back together, but I promise you, God looks at this and he sees potential. You want to know why? because Jesus died to put these pieces back together. And God's standing there saying, man, if you just let me help you. You can't do it on your own, but we can do it together. And this is what the son comes to realize in our story. This is what he comes to find. And so he decides, you know what? It's not working for me on my own. I got to go home. And so he starts to head towards home. And as he's walking down the road and as he's approaching home, he's not there yet, but maybe he's coming down the street and he's got this feeling in his stomach. He's got this sick, nauseous feeling like my father's not going to accept me. He's going to reject me. He's going to turn me away. He couldn't possibly love me after what I've done. And his knees are weak. His legs are shaking. Every single step he takes is forced because all he wants is to follow that urge deep inside of him to turn and run. And just when he's about to give in to that urge, this is what happens. It says, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. While he was still far away. While he was still distant. Do you know what that means? That means his father had been searching for him. That means his father had been watching for him. That means his father had been pursuing him and waiting for him and praying that he would come home. Do you know that your Father is watching for you? Do you know that God who loves you is waiting for you? He's pursuing you. He's searching for you. And he's hoping every single day that you're just going to choose. Maybe today is the day that you're just going to choose. It's time for me to turn around. It's time for me to go home. That's what God wants. That's what he's waiting for. You see, he's pursuing you, but it's not to catch you to punish you. It's not to catch you because you're in trouble. He's pursuing you because he loves you. And every single day you're apart, it kills him. It breaks his heart. And we know this is true because John 3:17 says, God sent his son into the world, not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. So the father sees the son coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son and embraced him and kissed him. And his son said, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you. I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to his servants, that's ridiculous. Bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Bring a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. And kill the calf we've been fattening because this son of mine, we've got to celebrate because he was dead and he's returned to life. He was lost and now he's found. And the Bible says, so the party began. Listen to me. You got to stop running. You got to stop running. God is saying to you today, it's time to quit. Give up. Surrender. He says, I don't care how worthless people say you are. I don't care what people think of you. I don't care if people look at you and they see junk. God says, you are not worthless. You're priceless. In fact, you're so priceless. God says, I sent my son into the world to save you. He took all of that sin. He took all of that shame, all of that junk, all that dirt. He took it on himself and he went to the cross with it. And he died in your place to pay your price. And the thing is, Jesus did take that stuff. He did take it to the cross. And he did die with it. And they put him in the tomb with it. But 3 days later, he came out of that tomb and he left it there. And because there is a living God that loves you and pursues you, it doesn't have to control your life anymore. It doesn't have to be your reality. And so here's the thing. There's a difference between the world and Jesus, and it's this. The world looks at you and they say you're filthy. Your clothes are dirty, you're a mess. You need to go clean yourself up and then come back. But Jesus looks at you and he says, you're filthy, your clothes are dirty, have mine. I'll take yours.